Here's something that bothers most men who've thought about it at all. The guy who texts back immediately, who remembers her favorite restaurant, who shows up consistently and tells her exactly how he feels. He's the one who gets labeled sweet, but nothing more. And the other guy, the one who's 3 days late with a reply, who seems perpetually unbothered, who gives her just enough and vanishes she can't stop thinking about him. It doesn't track logically, but it's happening constantly, all around you, to people you know. Before you dismiss it as women being broken or the world being unfair, there's actually a very clean psychological explanation for what's happening. And once you see it clearly, you'll stop being confused by it and start understanding what attraction actually runs on. Researchers ran a study that made this uncomfortable dynamic visible in a controlled setting. They observed 2 groups of men interacting with women in social situations. The first group was coached to be attentive, complimentary, responsive, genuine boyfriend energy. The second group was told to be warm sometimes, distant other times, emotionally inconsistent, clearly more interested in their own world than in winning her over. When women were asked to rate both groups on attractiveness, on who they were drawn to, on who they'd want to see again, the emotionally inconsistent men won, by a significant margin. Same physical setting, same conversations, completely different results. Why? The answer is intermittent reinforcement. This is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. When a slot machine pays out on a fixed schedule, players lose interest quickly, it becomes predictable, mechanical. But when the payout is variable, when you never quite know if this next pull will hit, the dopamine spike goes through the roof. You become obsessed with the outcome. The brain doesn't respond to certainty, it responds to uncertainty. When a woman can't quite read where she stands with a man, when sometimes he's warm and engaged and sometimes he seems barely interested, her brain treats that ambiguity as an open loop. It can't close the file. It keeps returning to the question. It releases dopamine every time she anticipates contact with him. You've become the slot machine, and she keeps pulling the handle. This isn't a moral statement about women, it's just how human dopamine systems work. The same mechanism would hook men too under the right conditions. What makes it more visible in dating is that F-boys stumble into this pattern accidentally, while most good men stumble out of it accidentally by over-providing certainty before she's invested. In the same study, there was a second finding that deserves attention. Women were shown photos of men and told 3 different things. This man is definitely interested in you. This man is definitely not interested in you. Or we're not sure if he's interested or not. When rating attractiveness, the uncertain group consistently scored highest. Not the confident one, not the certain pursuit, the question mark. Because here's what uncertainty does psychologically. It activates imagination. She fills in the blanks herself. She starts building a mental version of you, a version constructed from her own desires and projections. And that version she's built, it's more compelling than anything you could present in real life. Because she wrote it, F-boys benefit from this without trying. They give partial information. They don't explain themselves. They don't volunteer their feelings on day 2. And the woman's imagination does the rest, writing a story about them that they never had to earn. This is where the nice guy goes wrong, and it's worth being precise about it. The nice guy believes that investment creates intimacy, that if he demonstrates how much he cares early, often, and clearly, she'll feel secure, and that security will become attraction. So he texts consistently, pays close attention, expresses his feelings, makes her feel important. What actually happens is the opposite of what he intends. By removing all uncertainty, he removes the mechanism that creates desire. There's no open loop, no imagination, no dopamine chase. She has all the information, file closed. He becomes comfortable, familiar, and eventually, despite his feelings being completely real, he starts to feel like a friend. Not because she's cruel, because comfort without tension is friendship, and you can care deeply about your friends without wanting to sleep with them. The other thing the nice guy does is prioritize her above himself, and this sends a signal that's hard to come back from. When you organize your schedule around her availability, when your mood visibly tracks whether she replied, when she can feel your self-worth hovering just below the surface, waiting for her validation, that's not just unsexy, it's destabilizing. She doesn't want to be responsible for your emotional foundation. She wants to be invited into a world that's spinning, whether she's there or not. F-boys project exactly that, often without meaning to. They have their own thing going on, their gym, their friends, their work, their next thing. They're not performing indifference, they're genuinely more interested in their own lives than in managing her emotional state. And that self-prioritization reads as high value, it reads as abundance. It reads as, this man has options and isn't desperate for mine. Women are drawn to that energy the way everyone is drawn to people who don't seem to need them. There's a difference between someone who wants your company and someone who needs it. The first is attractive, the second is pressure. F-boys stumble into the first by default. You can choose it consciously. There's another phenomenon in play here, the Zeigarnik effect. It's the psychological principle that unfinished things dominate mental space more than completed ones. Your brain allocates ongoing cognitive resources to open-loop situations that haven't resolved and keeps returning to them until they close. When a man ghosts after a great conversation, when he goes quiet after a night that felt charged, when he's present and engaged, and then simply disappears for a few days, she's stuck with an unfinished emotional experience. Her brain keeps circling back to it, trying to resolve the loop. This is why ghosting sometimes pulls her back harder than a heartfelt message. It's not because she prefers bad treatment, it's because the unresolved thing won't leave her alone. He's in her head not because he earned it, but because the loop is open. F-boys create open loops constantly, usually not intentionally, but the effect is real, and understanding it changes how you think about what keeps you memorable. So, what's the actual lesson here? Not to become toxic, not to manipulate, not to be emotionally unavailable as a strategy to trick women into caring about you. None of that. Because even if it works short term, it attracts the wrong energy and it costs you your own integrity. That's not a trade worth making. The real lesson is this: attraction runs on emotional stimulation, not emotional certainty. And there's a version of this you can embody completely authentically, without cruelty, without games, without pretending to be someone you're not. It starts with actually having a life you're invested in. When your work, your training, your friendships, your creative projects genuinely consume real energy, you're not performing busy. You're actually busy. And that reads entirely differently than manufactured distance. It continues with learning when not to fill space. Not every silence needs a text. Not every moment of tension needs to be smoothed over immediately. Let her sit with something sometimes. Not to torture her, but because real depth takes time to develop and you can't rush it with over-communication. It includes not volunteering your emotional hand before she's shown hers. Restraint isn't coldness, it's calibration. A man who reveals himself in proportion to what she's demonstrated she deserves to know is not withholding, he's measured. That's different from being closed off. And it requires genuine emotional regulation. The man who doesn't flinch when she goes quiet for a day, who doesn't spiral when she seems distant, who stays steady when she tests, not because he doesn't care, but because his self-worth doesn't live in her response to him. That man is rare, and rare things get treated differently. Here's the distinction that matters most. F-boys are emotionally indifferent by accident, and that indifference eventually damages every connection they make. They attract but can't hold. They get chased but never trusted. They're interesting but never safe. The dynamic they create is exciting in the short term and hollow by the third month. What you're building is something different. Emotional independence, not emotional indifference. You care, you feel things, you're capable of depth and vulnerability, but you don't hand those things over before they've been earned. You don't let her emotional state become the weather in your internal world. You don't need her approval to know your own value. That combination, genuine depth available, but not handed over freely, is what creates the kind of attraction that doesn't burn out. It's mysterious, not because you're hiding anything, but because you actually have more to uncover, and you're comfortable letting that happen slowly. The men who get this right aren't cold, they're composed. They can sit in silence with a woman and let the moment exist without rushing to fill it. They can hear her test them and not take the bait. They can feel pulled toward her and still move at their own pace. Their interest is real, but it doesn't make them reactive. And that composure, that quiet, grounded, unhurried energy, triggers something that no amount of effort or attentiveness can manufacture. She doesn't just want you. She can't quite figure out how to stop thinking about you. That's not a trick. That's what happens when a man is actually centered in himself. Don't envy the F-boy. Understand him. Take what's real in what he does. The self-possession, the presence, the refusal to chase and strip away the damage and the emptiness. What's left is the version of this that actually works, not just for getting her attention, but for keeping your own self-respect intact while you do it. Build that, the rest follows.